What soldiers mocked as junk became one of the deadliest weapons on Iwo Jima. At 9:02 on the morning of February 19th, 1945, Corporal Tony Stein charged across black volcanic sand on Yuma, firing a weapon his commanding officer had ordered him to leave on the ship. The Stinger, a machine gun built from scrap metal and aircraft parts, a weapon his fellow Marines called a death trap, 23 years old, Dayton machinist. 0 confirmed kills. The Japanese had fortified Yuma with 450 pill boxes. In the past 3 hours they had killed 400 Marines trying to push inland from Green Beach. Stein was about to prove every expert wrong. The volcanic sand was black, loose, and deep. Marines stumbled off landing craft and immediately sank ankle deep. Bullets snapped past, mortars exploded, men went down. Stein made it to the first terrace and dropped behind it. Around him, Marines were pinned down by Japanese machine gun fire from fortified positions inland. A pillbox about 150 yards up the beach was cutting down Marines as they advanced. Concrete bunker, small firing slit machine gun visible inside. This was what the Stinger was built for. Stein set up the bipod, aimed at the pillbox's firing slit, and pulled the trigger. The Stinger roared 200 rounds per minute. Tracer rounds every fifth bullet streaking toward the target. The burst lasted 5 seconds, maybe 100 rounds. The concrete around the firing slit exploded in chips and dust. The Japanese machine gun inside went silent. Marines nearby stared. They wanted to know what the hell that thing was. Someone shouted that Stein had some kind of machine gun. 3 weeks earlier, Captain Harrison Roberts had stood at a firing range at Camp Tarawa, Hawaii, watching Tony Stein demonstrate this exact weapon. Roberts didn't see innovation. He saw a liability. Roberts wanted to know what the hell Stein was firing. Stein had just finished firing the Stinger at targets 300Y, D out. He explained it was a modified aircraft gun, and an M2 Browning built from salvaged parts. Roberts walked closer, examining the weapon with disgust. He noted it wasn't Marine Corps issue. Stein acknowledged that but explained it was effective. 200 rounds per minute, handheld, no tripod required. Roberts pointed out there was no cooling jacket. He wanted to know what would happen when the barrel overheated in combat. Stein explained you fired in short bursts and let it cool between engagements. Roberts shook his head. He told Stein that the weapons the Marine Corps issued were tested, approved, and reliable. They didn't fail when you needed them most. Roberts said Stein's contraption, this scrap metal gun, was going to fail, and when it did, Stein would get himself killed. Roberts paused, his voice dropping. Worse, Stein would get the men around him killed. Stein met his captain's eyes. He explained that the M19/19 Browning weighed too much and fired too slow against Japanese pillboxes. They needed more firepower. This weapon provided it. Roberts dismissed it as an unauthorized piece of junk that had no place in his company. Roberts stepped closer. He ordered that when they shipped out, that weapon would stay behind. Stein would carry standard-issue equipment like every other Marine. Roberts wanted to know if that was clear. Stein said it was crystal clear, but when the 5th Marine Division sailed from Hawaii on January 27th, 1945, Tony Stein brought his Stinger with him hidden in his gear against orders. Now on the beaches of Yuma, that scrap metal gun was saving lives. Stein swung the Stinger toward another pillbox 70 yards to the right, built into a volcanic rock terrace. The machine gun inside was sweeping the beach, cutting down Marines trying to advance. He aimed, fired. 5-second burst, pause, another burst. The pillbox went silent, but Stein was burning through ammunition faster than anyone in the company. 200 rounds per minute meant a 250-round belt lasted about 12 seconds of sustained fire. In the first 20 minutes on the beach, he'd used 4 belts, 1000 rounds gone. He had 500 left. Stein shouted to Corporal Frank Rodriguez that he was out of belts. Rodriguez told him there was more ammunition back on the beach at the supply dump near the water. Stein asked how far. Maybe 80 yards through sand under fire. Japanese mortars were falling randomly across the landing area. Machine gun fire swept the sand, but the Marines needed that ammunition. The Stinger was the only weapon that could suppress those pill boxes effectively. Stein said he would go. Rodriguez grabbed Stein's arm. Rodriguez told him he would get killed. Stein said they would all get killed if they stayed pinned there. He needed more ammunition. Stein didn't wait for permission. He left the Stinger with Rodriguez, too heavy to carry on a run, took only his rifle, and started running back toward the beach. The volcanic sand pulled at Stein's boots. He stumbled, caught himself, kept moving. A mortar round exploded 20 yards to his right. Shrapnel winded past. He reached the supply dump. Ammunition crates were stacked near the water's edge, under scattered cover. Stein grabbed 2 belts of .30 caliber ammunition, slung them over his shoulder, and started back. Halfway back, he saw a Marine down in the sand, not moving. Another Marine was crawling toward him, trying to reach him. Stein changed course. The wounded Marine had taken shrapnel to the leg, bleeding badly. The other Marine was trying to drag him to cover, but wasn't strong enough. Stein grabbed the wounded man under the arms. He told the other Marine he had him. Together they dragged him back to the terrace where Rodriguez waited. A corpsman took over. Stein grabbed the Stinger and loaded a fresh belt. Total time for the run, maybe 4 minutes. He'd brought back ammunition. He'd brought back a wounded Marine, and he was about to do it again. Over the next 6 hours, Tony Stein made 8 trips back to that supply dump. 8 times running through Japanese fire, 8 times bringing back ammunition, 8 times carrying a wounded Marine to safety. He destroyed 5 pill boxes, killed at least 20 Japanese soldiers, and kept the Stinger firing when every expert said it would fail. If you want to see how this scrap metal gun that wasn't supposed to work changed Marine Corps tactics forever, please hit that like button. It helps us share more forgotten stories like this, and please subscribe if you haven't already. Back to Tony Stein. The story of the Stinger began 9 months earlier on Bougainville, October 1943. The 1st Parachute Battalion was fighting a grinding campaign against Japanese forces dug into jungle positions. The fighting was brutal, close, range firefights, ambushes, counterattacks through dense vegetation. The Marines needed firepower. They needed it fast, portable, and overwhelming. The standard issue weapons weren't cutting it. The M19, 119 Browning machine gun was effective, but weighed 31 lb without ammunition. You needed a crew to move it. You needed time to set up. The Browning automatic rifle was lighter, but fired only 150 rounds per minute. Good for suppression, but not enough to shred a Japanese position. The Thompson submachine gun was handheld, but only effective at close range. Beyond 75 yards, it was useless. The Marines needed something better. Sergeant Mel Grevich was a machinist from Milwaukee. He'd worked in tool and die shops before the war. He understood metal tolerances, stress points. Grevich saw the same problem everyone else saw. Conventional weapons weren't adequate for jungle warfare against fortified positions. But unlike everyone else, he had the skills to build a solution. One evening in late October, Grevich was near the airfield on Bougainville. A Marine Corsair had crashed on the runway during takeoff. The pilot had escaped uninjured, but the plane was wrecked. Salvage crews were stripping useful parts. Grevich walked over to watch, and that's when he saw it. The Browning machine gun mounted in the Corsair's wing, aircraft version of the .30 caliber, 200 rounds per minute. Lighter than the M19 because it didn't need the same heavy mounting system designed to fire from vibrating moving aircraft, but no cooling jacket, no tripod, not designed to be handheld. Grevich stood there staring at that gun, and an idea formed. What if you could mount that aircraft gun on something stable enough to fire from the shoulder or bipod? What if you stripped away the aircraft mounting hardware and adapted it to ground use? What if you could give a Marine the firepower of an aircraft gun? Grevich asked the salvage crew if he could have the gun. They looked at him like he was crazy. They wanted to know what he planned to do with it. Grevich said he wanted to try something. The crew shrugged. As far as they were concerned, the gun was scrap. Take it if you want it. Grevich took it. He brought in Private First Class John Little, another machinist who understood fabrication. Together, they worked on that gun every spare moment they had. They stripped the aircraft gun down to its core components, remove the mounting brackets, remove the charging system designed for aircraft use. They needed a stock, something to absorb recoil and allow handheld firing. Grevich found a broken M1 Garand, a rifle that had been damaged in combat and marked for disposal. He cut the stock and modified it to fit the aircraft gun. They needed a trigger system. The aircraft gun had a solenoid trigger designed to be fired electrically from the cockpit. Grevich adapted a manual trigger from a Browning automatic rifle, simple mechanical linkage. They needed a way to control recoil. Aircraft guns were mounted solidly in wings. They didn't need recoil mitigation. Grevich welded a bipod assembly from salvaged parts. Heavy steel legs that could dig into sand or dirt. They needed a sighting system. Aircraft guns didn't have sights because pilots used gun sights mounted in the cockpit. Grevich fabricated simple iron sights from sheet metal, basic, functional, nothing fancy. By mid-November 1943, the weapon was complete. It looked, frankly, terrible. Mismatched parts, visible welds, a rifle stock attached to an aircraft gun. One Marine looked at it and called it Frankenstein's monster. Another called it the Stinger because it looked like something cobbled together but might actually hurt. The name stuck. Grevich took the Stinger to a makeshift firing range behind the camp. He loaded a belt of .30 caliber ammunition, set up the bipod, aimed at a target 50 yards out, pulled the trigger. The Stinger roared. The rate of fire was insane. 100 rounds per minute meant 20 rounds per second. The burst lasted 2 seconds, 40 rounds downrange. The target, a section of Japanese fortification they'd captured and dragged back for training, disintegrated. Grevich checked the weapon. No jams, no mechanical failures. The barrel was hot, but not dangerously so. The bipod had held steady. The recoil was manageable. It worked. The Stinger actually worked. Word spread through the 1st Parachute Battalion. Marines came to watch Grevich fire it. Some were impressed. Others were skeptical. They pointed out the gun had no cooling jacket. It would overheat. They pointed out it burned through ammunition too fast. You'd run out of belts in minutes. They pointed out it was cobbled together from salvaged parts. Something would break under sustained combat use. Grevich listened to all of this. Then he said something that would become his standard response to skeptics. The weapon worked now. He'd modify it if problems came up in combat, but for now it did what he needed it to do, give a single Marine the firepower of a curved weapon. Grevich decided to build more. Over the next few weeks, he and Little built 5 additional Stingers, 6 total. They needed Marines who could handle the weapons, Marines with machine gun experience, Marines who understood the mechanics. Tony Stein was one of those Marines. Stein was a machinist from Dayton. He'd worked in tool and die shops since he was 16. He understood how the Stinger worked. He could maintain it. He could repair it if something broke. Grevich gave Stein one of the 6 Stingers. Stein took to it immediately. He test-fired it, made minor adjustments to the sights, modified the bipod slightly for his preference. The weapon became his. And when officers started questioning these unauthorized guns, Stein became one of their most vocal defenders. When the 1st Parachute Battalion rotated back to Hawaii in early 1944, the 6 Marines with Stingers brought them along. They'd field-tested the weapons during the final weeks on Bougainville, used them in combat engagements. The Stingers had performed exactly as designed. High rate of fire, devastating effect on Japanese positions, no mechanical failures. But bringing unauthorized weapons back to Camp Tarawa meant dealing with officers who hadn't seen them in action. Officers who only saw regulations. First Lieutenant James Caldwell was the company's executive officer. He saw the Stingers during a weapons inspection in late January 1944. Caldwell wanted to know what the hell those were. The Marines explained they were modified aircraft guns built on Bougainville used in combat. They worked. Caldwell examined the weapons like they might explode. He noted they weren't Marine Corps issue. The Marines acknowledged that. Caldwell wanted to know if they understood that carrying unauthorized weapons violated regulations. They said they understood, but the weapons had proven effective in combat. They provided firepower that standard weapons couldn't match. Caldwell told them that effectiveness didn't matter if the weapons failed when they needed the most. He told them that improvised weapons had no place in a Marine company. The Marine Corps issued tested, reliable equipment for a reason. Caldwell ordered the Marines to disassemble the weapons and dispose of the parts. They would carry standard issue equipment, nothing else. Stein asked if he could demonstrate the weapon's effectiveness first, show Caldwell what it could do. Caldwell considered this. Finally, he agreed. One demonstration. If the weapons failed, they would be disassembled immediately. 2 days later, the Marines demonstrated the Stingers at the Camp Terror. While firing range, Caldwell watched. So did Captain Roberts. So did half the company. They set up a series of targets at various ranges. 50 yards, 100 yards, 200 YD, 300 YD. Each Marine fired burst at the targets. Short controlled bursts, 2 to 3 seconds each. Every target was destroyed. The 50-yard targets were obliterated. The 300-yard targets took multiple bursts, but were still effectively suppressed. They reloaded, fired again. The weapons never jammed. The barrels heated up, but never reached dangerous temperatures. The bipods remained stable. When the demonstration ended, they had fired approximately 800 rounds per weapon. 0 malfunctions. The Marines watching were impressed. Sewell and Roberts were not. Roberts approached Stein after the demonstration. He acknowledged the weapon performed well under controlled conditions, but controlled conditions weren't combat. In combat, things went wrong. Weapons jammed, parts broke, and when that happened with standard issue equipment, you could get replacement parts. You could get repairs from armorers. What would they do when these cobbled-together guns broke in the middle of a firefight? Roberts wanted to know. Stein said he would fix it. He'd helped refine it. He could repair it. Roberts shook his head. He told them that repairing weapons in combat wasn't how Marines operated. They operated as units with standardized equipment. When one Marine's weapon failed, another Marine could hand him a spare. When ammunition ran low, you could redistribute from other squads. The Stingers broke all of that. They used .30 caliber aircraft ammunition in belts that no other weapon in the company used. They required specialized maintenance that only a few men could perform. If those men went down, the weapons became useless. Roberts made his decision. The Stingers would not deploy with the company. They were too much of a liability. When they shipped out for the next operation, wherever that was, the scrap metal guns would stay behind. That was an order the Marines said they understood. But Roberts could see in their eyes that they didn't agree. Over the next 6 months, the Marines with Stingers made improvements to the weapons. They couldn't prevent the order to leave them behind, but they could make sure they worked better when they inevitably brought them anyway. The cooling problem was real. After sustained firing, the barrels heated to temperatures that could cause malfunctions. They couldn't add cooling jackets without adding too much weight, but they could improve heat dissipation. They wrapped sections of the barrels with heat-resistant claw salvaged from damaged flight gear. Not a perfect solution, but it helped. They modified the bipods. The original designs worked on flat ground, but struggled in sand or loose soil. They added wider feet, more surface area to prevent sinking. They improved the sighting systems. The original iron sights were functional but crude. They fabricated more precise rear sights with windage adjustment. Still simple, still durable, but more accurate. By summer of 1944, the Stingers had evolved. They were still cobbled together weapons built from aircraft parts and rifle components, but they were refined, tested, combat-proven, and the Marines who carried them had no intention of leaving them behind. The 5th Marine Division was formed in November 1944. Tony Stein was assigned to Company A, 1st Battalion, 28th Marines, new division, new officers. Another chance to be told his weapon wasn't authorized. Captain Harrison Roberts was assigned as commanding officer of Company A. Roberts reviewed the company's personnel and equipment. When he got to Corporal Stein, he saw the notation in Stein's file, demonstrated unauthorized weapon, ordered not to deploy with non-standard equipment. Roberts called Stein to his office. He wanted to see this weapon everyone had been talking about. Stein brought the Stinger. Roberts examined it carefully. He asked about its specifications, rate of fire, ammunition type, weight, effective range. Stein answered every question. Roberts asked about field reliability. Stein explained he'd used it on Bougainville. Multiple combat engagements, 0 malfunctions. Roberts nodded slowly. Then he said the same things every other officer had said. It wasn't tested. It wasn't approved. It created logistical complications. When they deployed, it would stay behind. Stein said he understood, but this time Roberts added something else. He told Stein he admired the craftsmanship. It was a well-built weapon. In different circumstances, it might be exactly what they needed, but these were the circumstances they had. Regulations mattered. Standardization mattered. The Stinger would not deploy. Roberts dismissed Stein. As Stein left, Roberts looked at the weapon one more time. Part of him knew Stein was right. The Stinger could provide firepower they would need, but part of him also knew that allowing Marines to carry unauthorized equipment opened a door that shouldn't be opened. If these 6 could bring their cobbled-together guns, why couldn't others modify their equipment? Where did it end? Roberts made the same choice. Every officer before him had made the safe choice, the choice that followed regulations. On January 27, 1945, the 5th Marine Division sailed for Yuma. Tony Stein was on that ship. So was the Stinger, hidden in Stein's gear, wrapped in canvas, disassembled to avoid detection during equipment inspections. Stein had decided months ago that if he was going into combat, he was going with the weapon he trusted most. Regulations could go to hell. Yuma was 8 square miles of volcanic rock in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. The Japanese had been fortifying it for 8 months. 450 pillboxes, 13 zeros, 0 defenders, miles of tunnels connecting underground positions, every approach covered by interlocking fields of fire. The American plan was straightforward. 3 Marine divisions would land on the eastern beaches. They would push inland, secure Mount Suribachi on the southern tip, take the airfields, fight north through fortified positions until the island was secure. Intelligence estimated the operation would take 5 days. It took 36. Intelligence estimated casualties would be moderate. The Marines suffered 26,000 casualties, 6,800 dead, 1/3 of all Marines who landed, the highest casualty rate of any battle in Marine Corps history. The Japanese defenders had turned Yuma into a killing field. They didn't fight from trenches or exposed positions. They fought from reinforced concrete bunkers with walls 3 FT thick. They fought from spider holes and camouflage positions. They let Marines advance past their positions, then opened fire from behind. Every yard of ground cost lives, and conventional tactics weren't working. The Marines landed with flamethrowers, demolition charges, and tank support. All of it was effective, none of it was enough. The Japanese pillboxes were positioned to provide mutual support. When you attacked one position, 2 others would open fire on you. When you destroyed one pillbox, Marines would advance, and a concealed position would open fire from a different angle. It was a nightmare. The Marines needed overwhelming firepower. They needed to suppress multiple positions simultaneously. They needed something that could pour fire into those concrete slits fast enough to keep defenders' heads down while Marines advanced. Tony Stein had exactly that weapon, and on February 19th, 1945, he was about to prove it. The landing craft carrying company hit Green Beach at 9:02 in the morning. The ramp dropped. Marines poured out onto volcanic sand, and the Japanese opened fire. Machine guns, mortars, artillery. The beach erupted in explosions and bullets. Marines went down immediately. Some never made it off the landing craft. Others took a few steps and fell. The volcanic sand was loose and deep. Every step was exhausting. Marines struggled to move forward. Stein was one of the first off his landing craft. He carried the Stinger across his chest, a rifle on his back, an ammunition belt slung over both shoulders. total weight about 80 lb. He ran forward through the sand. 20 yards, 30 yard. A Marine to his left went down, another fell ahead of him. Stein kept moving. He reached the first terrace, a natural rise in the volcanic sand about 40 yards from the water. It provided minimal cover, just enough to get out of direct fire. Stein dropped behind the terrace and looked back. The beach was chaos. Landing craft were still arriving. Marines were pinned down in the sand. Wounded men were crawling toward cover. And the Japanese were firing from positions the Marines couldn't see. Stein set up the Stinger, extended the bipod, loaded a belt of ammunition, scanned the terrain ahead. 150 yards inland, a concrete pillbox sat in a rise of volcanic rock. Small rectangular opening, machine gun barrel visible inside. The pillbox was firing in controlled bursts, sweeping the beach. Every burst killed or wounded Marines. Stein aimed at the opening, adjusted for wind, controlled his breathing, pulled the trigger. The Stinger erupted. 100 rounds per minute translated to 20 rounds per second. Stein fired for 5 seconds. 100 rounds downrange. The tracer round showed the stream of fire arcing toward the pillbox. Concrete exploded around the opening. Dust and fragments filled the air. The Japanese machine gun stopped firing. Whether the crew was dead or just suppressed, Stein didn't know. Either way, the pillbox was neutralized. Marines nearby turned to look. They wanted to know what Stein was firing. They'd never heard anything like it. Stein swung the Stinger to the right. Another pillbox 70 yards away. Same procedure. Aim, breathe, fire. 5-second burst. The pillbox went silent. In the first 10 minutes on Uima, Tony Stein had destroyed 2 Japanese positions. The Stinger had performed exactly as designed, and Captain Roberts somewhere on that beach was about to realize that regulations don't win battles. Firepower does. By 9:30, Stein had fired 6 belts of ammunition, 500 rounds. He destroyed 4 pillboxes and suppressed 2 others. Marines were advancing past his position, using the covering fire to move inland. But Stein was running out of ammunition. The 30 caliber belts were heavy. He'd carried 6 belts ashore, about 60 lb of ammunition. Now he was down to his last belt. 250 rounds, maybe 15 seconds of firing time. He needed more. Corporal Frank Rodriguez was firing from a position 10 yards to Stein's right. Stein called to him that he was almost out of belts. Rodriguez told him the supply dump was back on the beach near the water. Stein asked how far. Rodriguez estimated 80 yards. Stein looked back toward the beach. 80 yards of open sand. Japanese mortars were still falling. Machine gun fire was sweeping across the landing area, but the Marines needed the Stinger firing. It was the only weapon providing effective suppression of those pillboxes. Stein told Rodriguez he was going. Rodriguez grabbed his arm and told him he would get killed. Stein said they would all get killed if they stayed pinned down. He needed more ammunition. Stein left the Stinger with Rodriguez. The weapon weighed 23 lb, too heavy to carry on a sprint through sand under fire. He kept his rifle and started running. The volcanic sand pulled at every step. Stein's boots sank 4 in with each stride. It was like running through loose gravel, exhausting, slow. A mortar round exploded 30 yards to his left. Shrapnel winded past. Another explosion 20 yards to his right. Stein kept running. He reached the supply dump after maybe 90 seconds. Felt like 10 minutes. The dump was a cluster of ammunition crates stacked near the water's edge, partially covered by tarps. Marines were grabbing supplies and running back to the front lines. Stein grabbed 2 belts of 30 caliber ammunition, 40 lb, slung them over his shoulder, started back. Halfway back to his position, Stein saw a Marine lying in the sand, not moving. Another Marine was trying to reach him, crawling slowly. Stein changed direction, ran toward them. The wounded Marine had taken shrapnel to the leg, bleeding badly. The other Marine was trying to drag him, but couldn't manage the weight. Stein dropped the ammunition belts, grabbed the wounded man under the arms, told the other Marine he had him. Together, they dragged the wounded man back toward the terrace. It took 2 minutes. 2 minutes of pulling dead weight through loose sand, while bullets snapped past and mortars exploded nearby. They reached the terrace. A corpsman took over. Stein grabbed his ammunition belts and returned to his position. Rodriguez had kept the Stinger ready. Stein loaded a fresh belt and resumed firing. Total time for the run, 4 minutes. He brought back 500 rounds of ammunition. He brought back a wounded Marine, and he was about to do it 7 more times. Over the next 6 hours, Tony Stein made 8 trips to the supply dump. 8 times running through Japanese fire. 8 times bringing back ammunition. 8 times carrying a wounded Marine to safety. The pattern was consistent. Stein would fire the Stinger until he was low on ammunition. He'd leave the weapon with another Marine. He'd run back to the supply dump, grab 2 belts of .30 caliber ammunition, and on the way back, he would find a wounded Marine who needed help every single time. The second run, Stein carried a Marine who'd been hit by mortar fragments, both legs wounded, couldn't walk. Stein dragged him back to the aid station. The third run, Stein found a Marine who'd been shot through the shoulder in shock, disoriented. Stein got him to his feet and half-carried him back. The fourth run, Stein found 2 Marines pinned down by machine gun fire. One was wounded. The other was trying to provide covering fire. Stein helped them both back. By the 5th run, Marines on the beach had started to recognize Stein. They knew he was running ammunition. They knew he was carrying wounded men back. They started pointing him toward Marines who needed help. Corpsmen would shout directions. Other Marines would signal where wounded men were located. Stein would adjust his route to reach them. Every run was a calculated risk. Japanese mortars were falling randomly across the beach. There was no safe path. You just ran and hoped you didn't get hit. Stein never hesitated. He made 8 runs, brought back 16 belts of ammunition, 4 rounds total, carried 8 wounded Marines to safety. 8 men who might have died on that beach. 8 men who went home to their families because Tony Stein put their lives ahead of his own. And the Stinger, that scrap metal gun that wasn't supposed to work, destroyed 5 Japanese pill boxes and killed at least 20 enemy soldiers. It never jammed, never overheated to the point of failure, never broke. The weapon performed exactly as Grevich and Little had designed it to perform. By 3:00 in the afternoon, Company had advanced 500 yards inland, farther than any other company in the 28th Marines. The Stinger's suppressive fire had enabled that advance. Without it, the Marines would have been pinned down for hours, maybe days. More men would have died. The advance would have stalled. But with the Stinger providing overwhelming firepower, Marines could move. They could advance. They could take ground, and Tony Stein, the corporal with the unauthorized weapon, had proven every skeptic wrong. Captain Harrison Roberts spent that first day moving between platoon positions, assessing the situation, coordinating the advance. He'd heard about Stein's weapon, heard the distinctive sound of the high rate of fire, heard Marines talking about the corporal with the scrap metal gun who was destroying pill boxes. At 4 in the afternoon, Roberts found Stein at a forward position. Stein was cleaning the Stinger. Barrel was hot but cooling. The weapon was covered in volcanic dust and sand, but it was intact, functional. Roberts approached. Stein saw him coming and stood. Roberts looked at the Stinger. Then he looked at Stein. He asked how many runs Stein had made. Stein said 8. Roberts asked how many wounded Marines Stein had carried back. Stein said 8. Roberts asked how many enemy positions the Stinger had destroyed. Stein said at least 5, probably more. Roberts nodded slowly. He told Stein he'd been right about the weapon, about the firepower, about what the company needed. Roberts had been wrong to order Stein to leave it behind. Stein didn't say anything. What was there to say? Roberts asked if the weapon was still functional. Stein said it was, needed cleaning, needed a few minor adjustments, but it would be ready by tomorrow. Roberts told Stein to keep it, keep firing it, keep making runs if the company needed ammunition, but try not to get killed. The company needed Stein alive. Roberts walked away. That was the closest thing to an apology Stein would get. But it was enough. The Stinger was no longer unauthorized. It was now an essential weapon. and Tony Stein was no longer a corporal with a death wish. He was a Marine who'd found a way to save lives when conventional weapons couldn't. The fighting on Iwo continued for 9 more days. Tony Stein used the Stinger throughout late February. He destroyed additional pillboxes, killed more enemy soldiers, made more runs for ammunition. The Stinger became famous within the 28th Marines. Other companies wanted weapons like it. Armorers asked if they could build more. The problem was parts. There were no more aircraft guns to salvage. No time to manufacture new weapons, and by early March, the fighting had moved inland to terrain where the Stinger was less effective. Hills, ravines, close, range combat, and volcanic rock formations. The Stinger was built for suppressing fixed positions at medium range. In close combat, it was too heavy, too unwieldy. Stein started leaving it behind for certain missions. On February 28th, Stein led a patrol to scout Japanese positions near Hill 362. He carried a rifle, not the Stinger. The patrol encountered a Japanese machine gun position. Stein maneuvered to flank it. He and several other Marines attacked. The position was neutralized, but during the firefight, Stein was hit. A Japanese bullet struck him in the shoulder, not life, threatening, but serious enough to require medical attention. Stein was taken to the beach aid station. He spent the rest of the day there. Doctors told him he should rest. Stein refused. His company was still fighting. He wasn't staying behind. By evening, Stein was back with Company A. His shoulder was bandaged. Movement was painful, but he could still fight. He picked up the Stinger, made sure it was clean, made sure it was functional, and prepared for the next day's operations. March 1st, 1945. The 28th Marines had been in continuous combat for 11 days. Every Marine in the regiment was exhausted. Every unit was under strength. Company A had started the battle with 215 men. By March 1st, they had 160 effectives, 55 casualties, dead, wounded, or evacuated. The regiment was still fighting for control of Hill 362, a volcanic ridge in the north-central part of the island. Japanese defenders had fortified it with interlocking positions, caves, tunnels, hidden firing points. Every yard of progress cost lives. On the morning of March 1st, Company A was ordered to send a patrol to scout enemy positions. Intelligence indicated Japanese machine gun emplacements on the approaches to the hill. The patrol needed to locate them, assess their strength, report back. Stein volunteered to lead the patrol. He took 18 other Marines, 19 men total. They moved out at 0800 hours. The patrol moved cautiously through volcanic rock formations. Every ridge could hide enemy soldiers. Every cave could contain a machine gun nest. They advanced slowly, checking terrain, watching for movement. At 09:15, they spotted the first machine gun position, concealed in rocks about 70 yards ahead. The gun was positioned to cover the main approach to the hill. Stein signaled for the patrol to halt. He studied the position, counted at least 3 enemy soldiers visible, probably more inside the rocks. The patrol needed to get closer, assess the full defensive layout. Stein signaled for the patrol to advance. They moved forward in short rushes, cover to cover. At 0930, when they were 50 yards from the position, the Japanese opened fire. The machine gun swept the patrol's position. 2 Marines went down immediately, the rest dove for cover. Stein returned fire with his rifle. The patrol was pinned down. The machine gun had them in a crossfire with another position they hadn't spotted. Stein realized they were in a kill zone, multiple interlocking positions. The patrol needed to withdraw, but they couldn't leave the wounded Marines. Stein made his decision. He told the patrol to provide covering fire. He would go for the wounded men. Stein moved, low crawl. Using every bit of available cover, he reached the first wounded Marine, grabbed him, started dragging him back. The Japanese machine gun tracked him. Bullets kicked up volcanic dust, struck rocks. One round hit Stein, then another. Stein went down. The patrol's covering fire intensified. Several Marines rushed forward. They reached Stein, and the wounded Marine dragged them both to cover. Corpsman John Willis got to Stein first. 2 gunshot wounds, chest and abdomen. Willis tried to stop the bleeding, tried to stabilize him, but the wounds were too severe. Corporal Tony Stein died at 09:4:3 on March 1, 1945, 11 days after landing on Iwo, 23 years old. He destroyed at least 8 Japanese fortified positions, killed at least 30 enemy soldiers, made 8 runs through enemy fire to resupply ammunition and rescue wounded Marines. He'd proven that innovation and courage could overcome regulations and skepticism. The patrol extracted undercovering fire from other units. They brought Stein's body back. The Stinger was recovered. It was sent back to Hawaii with Stein's personal effects. Eventually, it ended up in storage. The other 5 Stingers continued to be used by their Marines, but Stein's weapon, the one that had destroyed 5 pillboxes on February 19th, was never fired in combat again. There was only one Tony Stein. On February 19th, 1946, Tony Stein's Medal of Honor was presented to his widow during a ceremony at the Ohio State House. The medal was presented by Rear Admiral Richard Pinoyer in the presence of Ohio Governor Frank Lash. The citation described Stein's actions on February 19, 1945, the 8 runs through enemy fire and the pillboxes destroyed, the wounded Marines rescued. The citation called him conspicuously gallant. It described the Stinger as a personally improvised aircraft-type weapon. The citation made no mention of Mel Grevich and John Little, made no mention of the fact that 6 Stingers existed, not one, made no mention of the skepticism the weapons had faced, made no mention of the regulations violated by bringing them ashore. Those details weren't considered relevant to the award. The award recognized courage, initiative, selfless service. Tony Stein had demonstrated all of that, and the full story of how the Stinger came to exist didn't diminish his heroism. Grevich and Little had created an innovative weapon. Stein had proven its worth in the most demanding circumstances imaginable. Both contributions mattered. Tony Stein was buried in Calvary Cemetery in Dayton, Ohio. His grave is marked with a simple headstone. No mention of the Stinger, just his name, rank, and the Medal of Honor emblem. Veterans groups occasionally hold ceremonies there, but most people who drive past the cemetery don't know who Tony Stein was or what he did. The story of the Stinger remains obscure. Military historians know about it. Weapons enthusiasts know about it, but it's not taught in most history classes. It doesn't appear in most documentaries about Iwo. The famous image of the battle is the flag raising, not a machinist from Dayton with an improvised machine gun. Maybe that's appropriate. Tony Stein didn't fight for recognition. He fought because his fellow Marines needed firepower. Mel Grevich had built the Stinger because he saw a problem and had the skills to solve it. Tony Stein proved the weapon worked, lives were saved, that's what mattered to them, and in the end, that's what should matter to us. Tony Stein's story raises questions that are still relevant 80 years later. How much initiative should individual soldiers have to modify equipment? When does innovation become insubordination? When should commanders override regulations to allow effective but unauthorized solutions? The military operates on standardization for good reason. Interchangeable parts, consistent training, reliable performance. When every soldier uses the same weapon, ammunition, and tactics, logistics become simpler and units operate more predictably. The Stingers violated that principle. They required specialized ammunition allocation. They needed custom maintenance. They couldn't be used by anyone who hadn't trained with them, specifically, but they worked. And in combat, that matters more than regulations. The tension between standardization and innovation is inherent in military operations. Rules exist to prevent chaos, but following rules can lead to defeat if the rules don't account for battlefield realities. Mel Grevich and John Little understood this. They saw that conventional weapons weren't adequate against Japanese pillboxes. They had the skills to build a solution. Tony Stein understood this, too. He had the courage to use that solution, even when ordered not to. That combination saved lives. The modern military tries to balance regulation with innovation. Special operations units allow more equipment customization. Individual soldiers can request specific gear. Field modifications are sometimes authorized, but it's a controlled process. You can't just weld together an aircraft gun and a rifle stock anymore. Maybe that's necessary. Modern weapons are complex. They're tested extensively. Unauthorized modifications can cause catastrophic failures, but something is lost when you eliminate all individual initiative. Grevich, Little, and Stein saw gaps between what the military provided and what combat required. They filled those gaps not by waiting for approval, not by submitting requests through proper channels, by building what was needed with their own hands and by having the courage to use it. That's the lesson. Not the specific weapon, not the technical details, but the principle. When lives are on the line and conventional solutions aren't working, individual initiative can make the difference between survival and death. Tony Stein made that difference. The Stinger was his tool, courage was his method, saving lives was his goal, and in the end, that scrap metal gun mocked and dismissed and nearly banned helped win one of the most important battles in American history. The skeptics were wrong, Grevich, Little, and Stein were right, and 80 years later that's a lesson still worth learning because the next war won't be won by committees. It'll be won by men and women like them who see a problem, build a solution, and have the courage to use it even when everyone tells them they're wrong. If this story moved you the way it moved us, do me a favor. Hit that like button right now. Every single like tells YouTube to show this story to more people. And these stories need to be told. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We're rescuing forgotten stories from dusty archives every single day. Stories about Marines who prove themselves with skill and courage. Real people, real heroism. Drop a comment right now and tell us where you're watching from. Are you watching from the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia? Our community stretches across the entire world. You're not just a viewer. You're part of keeping these memories alive. Tell us your location. Tell us if someone in your family served. Tell us if you've heard stories like Tony Stein's. Just let us know you're here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for making sure Tony Stein, Mel Grevich, and John Little don't disappear into silence.